Welcome to Conscious Living Radio. We're going to be airing live this week on 100.5 CFRO FM in Vancouver. And you're listening to Conscious Living Radio, the Conscious Conversations segment of what we do here at Conscious Living Radio. It's a new time, a new day. We're doing things differently because the studio is shut down. And one thing I would like to say about Co-op Radio is they are in their 45th year anniversary, and we've just started our fundraiser drive. So even though the station shut down and people are still broadcasting, I just wanted to remind everybody that, that we do a lot of great community work, and it's a volunteer-run nonprofit organization that operates and runs off your contributions and donations. So if you like the quality of our program and the content and other programs here on Co-op Radio, please visit coopradio.org or consciouslivingradio.org as well, and you can make a donation to help support local community programming. Now, with that being said, it gives me great pleasure. Again, I'm with my good friend and co-producer of the Spirit Plant Medicine Conference, and today it's 420. Happy 420, everyone, and our guest today is Karen Urquhart, and we're going to talk about her story. And for those of you who don't know, and I think pretty much everybody in our local area does anyways, 420 is Cannabis Day, and normally there's a really big celebration here in Vancouver that, because of the state of the situation in the world, has been canceled for the first time in years. And it's one of the largest probably free events going. So with that, this is our kind of tribute to 420. We're going to talk about cannabis and spirituality. Welcome, Stephen and Karen. How are you guys today?
Pretty good, thanks. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, maybe let's just start by really what's going on in our world and kind of what's happening as we get going, as we start talking about 420, cannabis and spirituality, and the healing properties of cannabis.
Oh, well.
Who wants to go first?
Is there a question in there exactly?
Yeah, well, just, what's happening in your world in a couple of seconds or a couple of sentences, Stephen and Karen. I'm just kind of curious how everybody's holding up.
Sure. Well, I'm in good spirits. The only problem I ever have is occasional conflict with my wife. But other than that, I'm chipper. And this whole coronavirus crisis has been quite an impetus, actually, to pay attention to what's going on. And my feeling is that anyone who has beneficial, positive insights and knowledge to share, it's extra beneficial or valuable at this time. There's, as Leonard Cohen and others might say, a crack in the system right now. There's a gap, and, we don't know where it's going to go, but there is a possibility that some minds can be changed. Things have gotten quieter, things have slowed down. People's faith in the sort of solidity and the continuity of business as usual is somewhat shaken. So there are a lot of us that are sitting, in our homes these days thinking, well, maybe there's room for some new information in that crack. So in a nutshell, that's kind of what I'm focusing on these days. And I won't bother going into the detail about what I'm doing, but that's what I'm focusing on.
Great. Well, thank you for sharing, Stephen. And how about you, Karen? You're in West Van. Karen is the Reverend of St Christopher's Church, and she's got a great and powerful story. But I'm curious how you and your parishioners are holding up, because I believe you've also closed down service as well.
Yeah, so we've been about 4 weeks without having any in-person service. So we've done the thing in to Zoom as well. So we're doing a few things on Zoom, but some social things as well. So they've played bingo, and we've done trivia nights, so some social things. And we have a regular night prayer thing. We hook up with one of my colleagues who's with Urban Aboriginal Ministries, and we do that together. And that's kind of an interesting cross-section of people that come on for that each evening. So everyone seems to be well and healthy, and they're managing quite well. Often I preach about retreat, especially Lent on the run up to Easter, about taking time out to reflect, to be quiet, to get time away from the busyness. And magically this has happened for them. Mm-hmm. They might not see it as magical, because being home is challenging if you're used to a busy schedule, and that kind of keeps you anchored. So some people it's more challenging than others. But those of us who are a little more introverted and enjoy quieter times and reflective times and reading, it's been really helpful actually. I'm enjoying just the change of pace and not having all the scheduled things the same. So sometimes I work late into the night, or I wake up at 3 a.m. and get inspired and want to write. And I don't have that pressure about having to get enough sleep so that I can function the next day, because that doesn't matter so much now. So it's been quite freeing actually, yeah.
My best fantasy about one of the things that might come out of this time is that people have had this slower time. A lot of people have had a much slower time and quieter time. And, you know, in my fantasy world, when they go back to their sort of, you know, nose to the grindstone full on, some of those people, and hopefully a lot of them, are going to remember this more relaxed, quieter time and go, there was something healthy about that. Maybe there's some adjustments that need to be made for the long term. I mean, I'm seeing so many people jogging in my neighborhood like I never have before, and bicycles everywhere, you know? Yeah.
Well, and that's something I just wanted to kind of touch on as well is, you know, this is a time for doing some of that, you know, internal work. You know, so many of us are so busy, in my perception, is we're human doings. We're not human beings. And so many people are so used to doing every day, all day, that they don't take any time in their own beingness. And so many people might even have jobs that they may not like or love or enjoy. There's certain things that are been happening where, you know, we work because we have to, you know, to pay our bills and things, versus doing what we love and living a life based on who we are and what we're passionate about, versus, oh my God, getting a job because I need to survive. And I think that this is, you know, it's certainly rattling the cages a lot, and there's some unsettledness. But I definitely believe that if, you know, for those who are open-minded enough to take the time to go within and look at themselves and who they really are, what they really love, to start looking at life that way, and possibly looking to reinvent their life when this is all over, because the world is not going to be the same. There's not going to be a normal that everybody was used to. And, you know, times are changing.
Absolutely. And, you know, and our culture has been so imbalanced that way. I've spoken to a number of people from some of the older European countries. They had a lot more festival days and, you know, time like that. And then even the Haida up here on the west coast of Canada, they had their life figured out where they had an immense amount of downtime. They spend a lot of time having celebrations and rituals and things like that. You know, they just did what they needed. And, you know, we have so many material demands in our lives, right? Like we have all this stuff, like these cars and these expensive machines that are constantly needing to be repaired and maintained and replaced and insured and all this stuff. And it just keeps you know, so many of us chained. You know, I mean, even like in the last 50 years, you know, not that it was good, you know, the way that the economic structure kept women alone at home necessarily, but nonetheless, you did not need two incomes in most families to get by. And now both people have to work for most families, right? It's just gotten, you know, way too intense in a lot of ways. And that's one like the key kind of messages for the whole thing is like, slow down, humans, slow down. You're missing so much.
Yeah. And I found it's been a good time for integration of remembering things that I'd forgotten about because everything's so busy. So getting out in the garden, which is really rare for me. I'm living in an apartment now too, so we only have a balcony, but I've been here at the church and planting vegetables and seeds, and it's been wonderful. And I forgot that I enjoyed doing that when I was a little girl, but life got busy. I went to school and disconnected in so many ways from some of the things I used to be doing. So now I'll be sitting there having some music on, and the music will trigger a memory from my past, and the memories will come flooding back, and it's like, oh, wow, I remember now that I like this. I'm going to do more of this and include this in my life now and get rid of some of that crazy busy stuff of running here, there, and everywhere.
Getting your hands in the real.
Yeah, it's so healthy, right?
Yeah. Well, we did the same thing at our home too, our community home. We set up some garden beds. We've got 4 yards of organic vegetable soil. We've got flowers and planters. We're really taking the time to, you know, connect with earth and the dirt and the plants, and taking that time for exactly that. And what I'm going to find really interesting is how this actually really settles, you know, with the economy, with employment, with businesses, and what it's going to mean. Because, you know, it all changed within, you know, the past 50, 75 years as capitalism and mass consumerism and low price started, you know, taking over the world. And then this desire, especially in the Western world, to just consume and consume and consume. And I like what you said, Stephen, about taking the time to slow down. And I think being 420, you know, we're here to talk about, you know, the healing powers of Santa Maria or cannabis and its use as a spiritual ally and as a medicine. And, you know, let's talk about how that has an opportunity to change our world. And especially now that it's legal in Canada, which is great, so we can talk about it even more openly than we ever used to. And people can still get their medicine because they haven't shut those stores down.
That's right. Yeah, well, you know, Mark, from the work that, you know, we've shared together, that that my kind of niche on the use of cannabis, not that it's the only one, I don't mean to be dogmatic about it in any way, is that it has this potential when you use it ritually, ceremonially, with intention and some discipline, to open up the system and calm the system down and open up the heart and actually land you on reality in a sense. However, also, not however, but along with that, it also has the potential to help people, if they do it that way, slow down. Because again, the thing when I say slow down, I mean, that could mean so many different things, but we're moving too fast to develop a relationship with things in general, you know. For example, like just hanging out with a bush or a tree. Stephen Herod Buhner talks a lot about this, how he actually started to hear messages, like telepathic messages from plants, by sitting with them for hours, like actually meditating, quieting his mind and establishing a relationship. It's like they're going a lot slower than we are, you know, a lot of things in this information is, you know, it takes place in the gap or the space or something like that. And we have to slow our minds and quiet our minds down enough to be able to, you know, enter that communication stream, I guess you could say. And so cannabis can help with that if you use it that way.
Mm-hmm. Now, Karen, you're here because I know you and Stephen have known each other for a while, and I had the opportunity to meet you last June when we did the Cannabis 101 conference for a day, and you spoke there because you have a really powerful healing story in regards to cannabis. And one of the things that I really love about you, other than you are you, is that you're a reverend. So you come from a very different demographic of believers of cannabis and users of cannabis. So maybe you can share your story and how that changed your life.
Sure. Well, my background is I grew up in Australia, in Perth, and I ended up, I worked in disabilities, and I had this call to ordination that I struggled with for a long time, and did the thing and said yes to whatever was going to happen, and all the doors opened, and I found myself ordained in this small country town in Western Australia with a bunch of hippies who many were using cannabis, but it was very illegal and still remains illegal in those parts. So it wasn't something that I participated in because there was a number of reasons. It really wasn't socially acceptable in my position to get found out as well. So that never happened. And then I later on, I also worked as a drug and alcohol counsellor and domestic violence worker. So I came across a lot of people, a lot of my clients who were using cannabis, self-medicating really their trauma, which I learned that and learned to understand that and kind of accepted what they were doing, but it was still very difficult. There was women who lost their children to child protection for their cannabis use, which seemed really excessive because you could see that they were great parents, great mums. So there's a lot of injustice in what was happening with the criminalisation of it. And it was seen as just another, as the hard drugs were. There was no real delineation between the two apart from some of the penalties that were imposed on people. But I came with quite a negative view of cannabis just from, I'd seen people off their faces on different kinds of substances, and part of me put it all in the same category as well because I hadn't had personal experience and didn't understand it as much.
So many people, I just want to inject that, like so many people have been in my opinion anyways, misled from reefer madness and the history of it to where we are today.
Exactly.
So,
And I didn't know that. I mean, we had a really good supervisor manager in the drug and alcohol agency I worked with, and he recommended a whole bunch of books and Gabor Mate, and so I'd had some introduction to some of that stuff, and I remember reading some of the texts and going, well, this doesn't seem as bad as I thought it was. This sounds kind of interesting. I wouldn't mind trying this. And I thought, I'm probably not meant to think like that. But I was surprised because what I was reading didn't match the experience I was having of what I was being told in the media and what I'd learnt from, you know, other workshops and that I'd been part of, especially when it was connected with criminal justice and child protection and things. So anyway, so fast forward, I end up in Vancouver, come here for a bit of a life change, applied for a parish over on the West Coast, which aligned more with my inclusive theology. I was having issues in those parts, much more conservative and weren't inclusive of LGBTI people, and I had lots of friends who were struggling with that, and I needed something, if I was going to return to feel that I fitted, and I really felt that I didn't fit. So over here in this diocese in New Westminster, it was much more open, much more liberal, and I really felt connected with colleagues once I arrived here, which was wonderful, and it continues to be like that. So that still grabs me, that how different this experience of being an Anglican priest is here compared to what it had been like there. But I did have this autoimmune condition called chronic idiopathic urticaria that came with me. It didn't get left behind, where I'd come out in hives all over my body. You know, it would just come up for days on end and be really itchy. I couldn't sleep at night. It's like being bitten by 1,000 mosquitoes sometimes, and my joints would swell. I was on high doses of prednisone, so I put on a lot of weight, so I felt lethargic and foggy in my head. And then all of a sudden I'd have a massive outbreak of it, and it would be even worse. It could be in my mouth. I'd gone to the emergency room where they thought that it was swelling my airways, things like that. So not a nice experience, and the medications really knocked me around. I saw a allergist here in Vancouver who put me on this new gold standard medication of injections every 4 weeks made from the ovaries of some hamster from China. Apparently really safe and the gold standard. It's called Xolair. So I said yes to that because nothing else was working. And I did that for about a year, but I didn't notice any change in my symptoms at all. So I decided I didn't want to do that anymore. And also at that time, the allergist said that I couldn't be prescribed prednisone anymore because I'd been on it for a number of years. And I didn't want to be on it either, but it was the only thing that gave me relief from my symptoms when I was in a big flare-up. So the prognosis was just keep cycling different kinds of antihistamines at double the regular dose and you'll be fine. Well, that didn't work for me. The antihistamines, I build a tolerance. They don't work. They work for a little while. So I was having sleepless nights of being itchy, more and more exhausted. And then cannabis legalization was in the news about this happening, and I thought, well, some people say it's a medicine. I know it helps people to go to sleep. My clients used to use it to calm down. If I could get some sleep, that would be helpful. So I did a little bit of research and figured out that vaporizing was probably a good way to go because I didn't want to be smoking because I learned about dangers of smoking. And the smell, I didn't want to draw attention to myself, so I got myself a little vaporizer. I accessed some cannabis from someone I knew in the community who was using it for medical reasons. And I just started using it for sleep to help me get to sleep. The first time I had it, I was really scared. I locked the house. I set my alarm for the next morning in case it really knocked me out and I wouldn't be able to function. I didn't know what was going to happen. I made sure the dog had gone out and had his dinner. I told my daughter when she comes home I was having kind of a migraine, so I might be in bed. And just made sure my whole environment was safe if the worst thing happened. Of course, nothing happened. I noticed a little bit of tingling in my legs, so that's about all I could remember happening. And I don't know that it vastly changed my sleeping, but it certainly wasn't the big scary thing I thought it was. So I'd used this for a couple of months, and my parents came on a vacation and visited us here, went on holiday with them for a few weeks. They went back, and then I started using the cannabis again, the whole discussion of telling them what I was doing, because they still probably thought it was a bad thing. And a couple of months later, I ran out of I was using a tiny little bit, like 1 gram in the vaporizer would last a week, because I was only using it every now and then as well. I went to the local dispensary. I'd moved home, and there was one just down on Hastings Street. So I went in there and I was blown away as well. I snuck in. I didn't want anyone to see me. I felt like I needed a mask or something, or a scarf. Made sure there was no one getting off the bus outside that knew me, and I snuck in. And it was a really uncomfortable experience, because I knew nothing, and the cool guys at the counter were way younger than me, and I must have appeared as this old lady that didn't know what she was talking about or anything. But I got brave, and I said, okay, this is what I need. I need something for my condition. I told him about it. And he said, oh, you could try this, 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 or this, have a smell. It all smelled the same to me at that point. Okay, this one will do. Give me that one. So I still don't know to this day whether it was this particular cannabis strain, or whether it was a culmination of, the dose had been titrated up or something over the time, or my body was at that point. But a couple of days after that, after buying that, I was at this, the bishop had a preaching conference that she was leading, and I was at that. And I started to get a cold, so my immune system was already really worked up, I think. And I could feel the hives coming on, and that just came all over me again. And I was sitting there saying, I've got to go home. I can't stay at this conference. So I left. I went home. I couldn't sleep all night. And then the next day I remembered, oh, I've got that cannabis. I must try that tonight so I can sleep. So I vaped that night. And I think I'd been in bed about 2 hours. I'd fallen asleep. But I woke up and I felt my whole body was tingling. And I felt like it was being zapped, every little cell in my body. If you've ever lit one of those charcoals for incense, the little charcoal circles, I do that quite a lot. And I noticed the other day, it's just like that. You light it, and then this sparkle just goes through the whole block. It was like that. It was like electricity just going up and down my body in it was random, but it wasn't. It was patterned. It came up and went through and down. And as this happened, it was a really lovely experience. I was in this kind of, didn't know how to describe it, like an ecstatic state, thinking this is some weird dream I'm having here. So I got up and went to the bathroom and realized it wasn't a dream. I don't think I was awake. So I went back to bed and laid there, and it started happening again. I thought, wow, I think I'm awake again. So I got up and turned the light on and looked at myself in the mirror. Yes, I'm awake. So this was real. So I convinced I was awake now, and I was really enjoying it, and my body was moving. If I relaxed, my body would spontaneously move, and there would be a lot of twitching and things would go on, but I could stop it moving if I wanted to. But it felt really good, so I just was experimenting and just let it go. And I was rubbing against the sheets as this movement was happening, and I was scared that in the morning my hives were going to be even worse from the friction on the sheets, but that wasn't the case. So this went on for quite some time. I fell back asleep. But at one point I think it was the adrenals in my back, I felt something pop, and it just felt like my body was being balanced. Everything was coming into balance. In the morning when I woke up, I was astonished to find that it was all the rash, everything had totally gone. I wasn't itchy anywhere, and I'd never had that on any kind of medication. And it was, wow, that's incredible. So then I started researching about cannabis and learned about endocannabinoid system, and that cannabis acts to promote homeostasis in the body where everything balances. And I literally had an experience of that before I knew that's how it worked. So I thought, okay, there's a lot I don't know about this, so I need to find out more. So I waited a few days. I was still researching. I waited till I had a day off, and I thought, I'm going to use cannabis in the daytime and see if I can copy that, what happened at nighttime, just to see. So I vaped some cannabis in the daytime, and I noticed, my neck muscles were starting to contract, and my head was moving differently, and I could feel that thing. So some more rebalancing was obviously happening, and I have noticed not recently, but in the months following that first experience, not all the time, but maybe once every 3 or 4 months, again, I'd have that experience of that electricity coming through and the balancing happening again. But what it did for me is it really showed me how much I didn't know. I'd assumed, you know, I thought I knew, I worked in drug and alcohol, I knew quite a bit about cannabis, more than most people, but I really didn't know the medical benefit of it, and I certainly, the mystical experience was really unexpected. So then I thought, okay, this is really relevant to me because I'm very, you know, mysticism and spirituality is my thing, and how can this experience happen on cannabis? So I started Googling, you know, cannabis and Christianity, cannabis and Anglican, cannabis and Catholic. Nothing much came up at all. Cannabis and spirituality did, and I found Stephen. So that was really helpful, and I saw he had a book, so I ordered that. I thought, wow, okay, this is really interesting. So it got me on a whole new path of exploring how cannabis actually helps us into a meditation or a spiritual experience. So I'm still learning about that and, you know, what that brings with it, but it has really, really boosted my, I feel, you know, I don't like to use the phrase because it's been hijacked by a lot of conservative Christians about born again, but literally it has given me my life back physically. I have lost 25 kilos in that time without dieting. I mean, I've changed my diet, but the cannabis, the plant medicine has helped me to do that. It helps me be in touch with my body and know what I should eat. Like I used to go to the refrigerator, chocolate cake, yeah, that'll be great. Now I can open the fridge and go, what does my body feel like? I'll have an apple.
Which is a great segue for all the people who think you always get the munchies and eat more.
It doesn't do that to me. Sometimes it does.
Yeah.
So Karen,
it's a trick of the body anyway.
Mm-hmm.
But I just wanted to hear more about. I'm curious about the hives and all that. Like, did you have to take cannabis every day after that to keep them away, or what happened with?
And how long has this not been happening for you?
Okay, so that was in October. It was the end of October 2018. That experience happened. I noticed the hives came back a little bit, but not as severe in the first month or two, and I got a bit nervous that they were going to come crashing back. But that seemed to disappear. I kept vaping because then I was using it for my spiritual life actually, and my spiritual health rather than just my physical health. So I've had no return of the symptoms at all in that time.
Do you have to do it daily to keep the hives away, do you think?
No, I don't think so, because I don't use cannabis every day now. I probably use it most days because I use it for meditation, but I think it's good to have a break as well. So I go with how I feel. So some days I feel that I don't need it, so I don't take it. I trust my intuition around it, and other days, but I usually have it in the evening. I wait until everything's quiet. I don't have to go anywhere. I've done all my meetings because I want to relax with it. I don't enjoy it socially as other people do. I don't have any objections to people using it socially because I think it's a healing thing and people can connect and communicate better sometimes when they're in that relaxed state. But I find it distracting because I want to go inward.
Me too. Yeah.
And then I get frustrated because I want to be left alone to do that journeying myself.
Yeah.
She teaches me and leads me to those deep places that I've been looking for decades and haven't been able to find.
Wonderful.
And takes me back to that beautiful space before religion as such got me, where I had a spirituality as a child of just knowing in nature. I didn't come from a religious family, but when I went to Catholic school, that gave a label and a box, and that became confined. So it takes me back into that more natural space of connecting with my own spirituality in nature and going deep in myself.
Very nice. Well, thank you so much for sharing that story, Karen. And we're going to take a deeper dive into cannabis and spirituality, the way Stephen has helped many of us kind of bridge that gap in what he's sharing and how it's changed your life and, you know, maybe even how it's affecting some of your parishioners. Just a quick break. I want to be able to say that you're listening to Conscious Conversations on Conscious Living Radio. We're on 100.5 FM in Co-op Radio in Vancouver. And we're here with Stephen Gray and Karen Urquhart. Our subject on 420 today is consciousness and spirituality. So how do you use it for your spiritual practice, Karen? And how, you know, I find it interesting, and this is what I love about speaking with you, is as a reverend, you kind of buck all the traditional norms, you know? So how do you use it, and what's been the response with the people in your parish, knowing that this is what you endorse and what's worked for you?
Sure. So for me, I was very, I guess, nervous at first, not knowing how it would be accepted, knowing I came with my own baggage myself. I mean, I had to do work on myself to be able to accept that I was doing this before telling anyone else. But I have a good friend who's in her early 80s, so I would go to her place. She wasn't really a parishioner, but I'd known her through a church context when I used to live in a bit further east of here. And we would have some cannabis together, vaporize together at her place, and we'd really enjoy it, and we'd talk about it. So she was the first person I really confided in, and in her wisdom and her gentleness, you know. And she said, "This is great. This is good. You know, like, this is okay." So it gave me some confidence then to share with more people. And so again, it was people that I knew quite well, and they were okay with that. I did tell my bishop fairly early on, because I felt it was better to be transparent and let her know, and legalization was coming. And it struck me that, hey, this is a healing story, and Jesus was about healing. He spent a third of his ministry healing, and the church seems to have lost that as well. And I've been healed here from cannabis. It's not from something else. And this is good news, and we're meant to be proclaiming the good news and healing. So this fitted beautifully with what I needed to be doing. But I just had to find a way of communicating that so it wouldn't scare people. So to focus that on healing. So, and this parish in West Vancouver, there's a lot of wonderful people here who are open-minded, intelligent thinkers. And some of them had the same ideas that I used to have. But once I told my story and started to talk with them, they go, yeah, okay, this makes sense. It's a medicine. And when we unpack the whole prohibition and why it was made illegal in the first place, which a lot of us never heard or knew about, suddenly it's like, oh, wow, yeah, this is something. So then they started getting interested, because a lot of our parishioners are, you know, older than me, I'll just say. So they face some of those health issues that come with age-related things like arthritis, aches and pains, sleeping problems. So they started getting interested, and particularly in CBD. So I've been doing some educational seminars around rethinking cannabis, so to present some of the historical facts about cannabis, how it was used in history for thousands of years through culture, what happened at prohibition, and the endocannabinoid system, how our body makes its own form of cannabis. The whole thing with breastfeeding babies has anandamide, which is our body's natural cannabis. Those kind of things. And when they hear those things, they suddenly realize that this is something they thought they knew about too, but they didn't. And so it opens a discussion. So yeah, I've been doing this process over the last couple of years to get to the point where I can feel free to come and speak more publicly about it now. But hey, it's legal now, and I think it's time. It's time. You know, I've been to Stephen's cannabis meditations, and the first one I went to was like, this is just like what we would do. We do this kind of things, but there's no difference, you know, apart from a little bit of cannabis. Some people will choose to use some cannabis to help them get into that zone. So that's basically, I'll have cannabis usually before I go to bed, and or I'll go and meditate. So at the moment I'm based at the church. So my son, he's learning to use cannabis more as a spiritual tool as well, instead of just using it recreationally or to get high. So he's not on tobacco anymore. He's gone 2 weeks without tobacco. He's replaced it with just a little bit of cannabis, which is even declining. So now just in the evening, we come together. We consecrate our Santa Maria together, sometimes in the church, sometimes outside. And we have it, and we have a little prayer. He goes off and does his thing, but I sit in the silence and the quiet, play some music. It's beautiful, and it's a beautiful way to end the day. And it helps me to feel whole and it helps me integrate the day more. That's what I'd say. And I would like to share that with more people, and not so that people that come from a Christian background or a more conservative background don't have the fear around that. It's about using it with intention and using it responsibly. You know, we're not doing it to, what does high mean anyway? We talk about high church, you know. High church is all the smells and bells and the beautiful excessive things that we use. Higher education is a good thing. You know, so even the words we use, it's interesting to see, you know, we have so many judgments around this, and we need to construct some of this. I do anyway.
Yeah, we're in a really exciting time with that. And, you know, I'd just like to weigh in for a moment, if I may, on this, because, so a couple things. First of all, cannabis is beautifully placed to be the leading edge of the wedge of opening up the connection between medicine like this and the other entheogens, the so-called major ones like ayahuasca, psilocybin, and so on. Cannabis, because it's so sort of user-friendly in that sense, so safe in most respects, you know, and so gentle while still having its own incredible power, potentially anyway, and because it's legal, at least in this country, and so on, it is like the advanced guard. At least this is my fantasy anyway. Cannabis is the advanced guard to going where you and I, Karen, have talked about this, and you know, you're, to my mind, you're a visionary this way, because you're like, this is like the beginning of a 1,000-year journey or something, you know, or 100 or 2 or 3, you know, of bringing these medicines, you know, cannabis first, because of the reasons I just said, but then opening up the potential over time. I don't know what the timeline is going to be on this, where we can actually start bringing real medicines into mainstream religious practice, into churches, into, you know, Christian churches and so on, you know, and really bring back powerful sacraments. I mean, it's been like that in indigenous communities all over the planet. And, you know, even in some of the more, you know, mainstream cultures 2,000, 3,000 years ago as well, you know. It's just that, you know, and then as far as cannabis, I'll just add this one little thing. There's no way to prove this, but cannabis, the plant, was all over the area where Jesus was. And given that there were no Christians around at the time, you know, with moral judgments about it, telling Jesus not to do it, there's, I would say, a very good chance that Jesus was familiar with that medicine and could have used it in his work, you know. So anyway, yeah, just I wanted to point that out, that, you know, Karen, for, you know, those people watching and listening to this, is at the forefront of a potential movement to bring real power, real medicines back into the churches, so that people can have, other than just hearing about it from a minister preaching to them or whatever, right?
Yeah, and
well, go ahead, Karen.
What it has done for me, it enhances my senses. What I think, it's through my own life, my own trauma. My trauma is related to probably a car accident that happened when I was 8 years old, and things like that, and disconnection. I think a lot of my senses have been shut down, and the cannabis has helped me to reconnect with my sensory stuff. So now when I listen to music, this is when I'm not using cannabis. Like, this has healed what's going on. This is not when I'm high, whatever that is. I hear better, I feel better, I experience life more fully. I feel that I'm in the dimension of living instead of observing life. It was like I was watching behind a screen, you know, like even now on Zoom, like, I can see Stephen is there, but in the past my life was kind of like that, but now it's like the real person is there. So that's what I mean. It's given me a lot more depth to my life. And I think that's in the past of what people, cannabis wouldn't have been a big no-no, it wasn't a no-no back then. So people, you know, the peasants in the farm would have used it in their diet, they would have perhaps smoked it as well. So their perceptions were higher than what we have perhaps, and that's why the beautiful music and the stained glass windows and the beautiful buildings would have been even more magnificent than what we can experience when we're so, I don't know, the environment we live in now with so many, a bad diet, pesticides, all these things are deadening us down. And this is like healed, it feels like it's healed me. I'm speaking from my own experience. This might not be other people's experience. But for me, it has given me life back again. And that's good news. And that's what my ministry is, to help people have a full life. And so this is key to that now. And I've just been doing the ropes beforehand, right?
Great. Well, one thing I want to honor you for, Karen, is your courage to speak out as a reverend and to, you know, put yourself in a public, you know, position as you share, because I know you do some speaking and things. So I just want to acknowledge that, because it's not always easy for a lot of people in this, you know, as these niches change with legalization, it makes it easier for sure. And I really what you said about Jesus being a healer and how that's kind of got lost in the church. And Stephen, you alluded to, you know, there's, you know, maybe some evidence that these things have been used in the past in the Bible. I remember at the conference, somebody shared even the recipe of, you know, the holy anointing oil that was, you know, with cannabis, was made with mass amounts of cannabis. So, you know, there are some correlations in there that would be a deeper dive on another day. But I just kind of wanted to, I first wanted to acknowledge your courage, Karen, and then, you know, throw that out there, because I thought that anointing oil and that recipe that somebody had pulled from the Bible was quite interesting. And and you had talked about Stephen's cannabis ceremonies, and I will say myself, as a, you know, as a cannabis friendly fella for all of my life, really, I had never thought of it in that way until my introduction into plant medicine, spirit plant medicine world, and things I was doing. And then I heard about this cannabis ceremony thing as I was on my journey. And lo and behold, I meet Stephen Gray. Not do I only meet with them, I'm now working with them and chatting with them daily. And this is what he does. So maybe, Stephen, you can tell us a little bit about this ceremony, because we did one online a couple of weeks ago because of the current situation that was really well received. And now we're partnering with Karen in the church to bring it again this Saturday to people online. So maybe tell us, you know, tell us more about these cannabis ceremonies and how cannabis is used in that way, and what people can expect by sitting with it as a spiritual sacrament.
Yes, thank you, Mark. Well, as we discussed some time ago in this conversation, you know, Karen and I were sort of sharing the idea that we like to go inward with it, so to speak. You know, but inward doesn't necessarily mean like inward to just thinking. Where this plant really, its purest healing and awakening power, I think, is when you can quiet the mind and just be fully present with her, at least part of the time. It's not that easy for anybody to do that, you know, consistently, except maybe Eckhart Tolle, but he doesn't smoke weed, as far as I know anyway. But in the gaps, you know, this is basic, you know, kind of universal spiritual teaching. In the space between thoughts is where crack, so to speak, right? And so because cannabis is a non-specific, in a sense, neutral to some degree, in some sense, at some level, you might say, non-specific amplifier, then it depends on what you do with it. So, you know, yes, it can deepen your sensual experience of a variety of things. It can sharpen some of your imagination as well and creative thinking, or on the more negative side, it can get you obsessing with certain kinds of thoughts that are not necessarily positive or helpful to you as well. But if you can make at least an effort to stay calm, and, you know, for example, let me just say this. A lot of people find, like a lot of people that are, you know, quite familiar with cannabis, like to move and do things with it. And, you know, that's fine too. You know, it's like, that's the amplifying effect, right? It gives you energy. But what if you take that same energy and then rather than spilling it off, spending it on things, so to speak, you try to calm yourself and open yourself so that the energy can strengthen your whole system, like and open it up, right? And so there's a kind of a multi-level healing that can happen that way, like mind, body, spirit can calm and open the movement of the channels in the body, the meridians and all that kind of stuff can work on the physical level. And as it's doing that, it's also opening up your mental sphere, your mental space, so to speak, as well, right? So the ceremony that we do, this one anyway, it's similar to the quote live ones we do in the evening. We sometimes do all day ones, and then I sometimes do weekend retreats as well. But this evening version, what we're doing online is fairly similar to what we would do live. There are definite advantages to being in the same room with people, which I won't go into detail here. But what we'll do this coming Saturday, April 25th, is we'll start at 7 p.m. I will give some kind of background and context, kind of cheerleading stuff, for about 15 minutes or so, and then we'll light up together. And there seems to be something, this was some of the feedback that came out from last one, was that people actually felt, even though we weren't in the same physical space, a number of the people seemed to feel that there was a sense that we were in a circle together. There was something kind of heartening or encouraging or empowering to people about the fact that they were aware that there were another 30 or 35 people doing the same thing at the same time, even though they were in their own rooms, right? So then what we did after people lit up, some people would have like an edible or a tincture or whatever, and I suggested they do that like at least an hour ahead of time so that they kind of arrive at the peak state at the same time as we do. And then those of us that are lighting up, all lighting up with a little prayer, dedication or something like that. And then the next hour and a half or so, I'm basically guiding people with doing simple little breathing exercises, a couple of little visualizations, and a bunch of sound things. I've got crystal bowls and little chimey things and my guitar and things like that. And the whole purpose of all that. And then we would leave a little space in between, like a couple of minutes to just sit in silence so that we can, again, meet that medicine and that medicine spirit, you might even say, in a pure, unobstructed space, right, or state. And then I bring in another one. But everything that would happen, whether it be just sitting in silence for 2-3 minutes at a time, or bringing in like a breath practice or a sound, would all be about opening up the channels and, in a sense, getting out of ourselves. The selves part, meaning this little guy up here that's always causing so much trouble, right?
Mm-hmm. And something you said earlier, Stephen, that I just wanted to kind of comment on was you talked about going within when you're smoking or consuming cannabis versus our usual everyday use. We're doing stuff or we're hanging out. And the biggest thing I noticed, and I know from other people who've sat with you in ceremony, is when you're sitting still compared to that moving around, like you talked about, it's that a very, very different thing because now your energy isn't going out.
Yeah.
Right?
So
and
that's
really, really powerful statement there.
Absolutely, and that's why I think of cannabis using cannabis in this way as an advanced spiritual practice, because it's hard enough, as most people who've ever tried to do a silent sitting meditation, like a follow the breath, kind of form-based meditation, as opposed to say like a chant practice or something. Mm-hmm. Just sitting there trying to quiet your mind. That's challenging for almost everybody, but then because cannabis raises the stakes, it's even more challenging because what it's actually asking you to do is soften your ego and open up, and that's the thing that we're walking around kind of trying to avoid all the time, in a sense, is letting go of the status quo, the known safe, as my old Buddhist teacher called it, cocoon that we kind of build around ourselves for this sense of self-protection. So cannabis wants to ease us out of that. And the best way to do that, or the most powerful, pure way to do that, is to be able to quiet the mind and allow that energy to come through. But it is challenging, and that's why dosage is also important. Anyway, yeah, so that's what we'll do on Saturday evening. And then depending on how many people sign up, I mean, if there's 60 or 70 people, then I don't know that we'd have a sharing session. But if there are about the same number we had last time, and a few of them faded out before the end anyway, especially people from Eastern time zones for whom it was quite late. We had maybe 24 people still with us when we formally closed the ceremony, and then we had some sharing, and that was really interesting. I really enjoyed hearing a few comments from people.
I was really impressed to see how well it was received for something like an online ceremony. And as we see in these times, there's a lot of people going to online events in different ways and finding the way to do that, which I think is important because it still allows us to have some physical closeness while we're having physical distancing.
Yeah. And by the way, for anyone who's watching or listening to this who was at that one, it was a challenge getting sound as good as we wanted to it. We did our best. I'm talking to $1,000 microphone right here, but still it was somewhat of a challenge to get all the instruments sounding really good for people. So anyone who was there, who's watching this one, please, two things. One, get the best sound you can, whether it's through speakers or some decent quality earbuds or headphones. And we're doing our part. I just went out and spent another $400 almost on a shotgun mic, which is a professional one. It's going to go along with this studio mic.
And I upgraded my Zoom.
Nice. So did I. Oh, no, I didn't upgrade my Zoom. I upgraded my operating system and internet plan to be faster as well. So we're really working to try to make this even more viscerally effective for people. Yeah.
Yeah. And then, so what we're doing it again this Saturday in cooperation with Karen at St. Christopher's Parish.
Yes. 7 p.m. Pacific. Yeah. And it will be done by about 9:30.
Now, I have put a link for anybody watching in the Facebook link below. It's going to be posted on the Conscious Living radio.org website, consciousliving.network.net as well. We've got all the information there. So if you're willing to join us, it's really inexpensive because we believe money should never be an option for people's transformation. What did I say? An option. Sorry, yes, obstacle or a setback. Thank you, Stephen, for any kind of transformation or doing any work. And we're just pulling it together because we want to make sure that we're, really doing what we can to help support our community in some of the work that we do. So I thank you so much for being willing to do that, Stephen, because it is a little different. And Karen, I also thank you for your support and endorsement, really, from the church perspective, because I think it's really important to get this word out now, especially with legalization and the stigma being gone so much in cannabis, that it's time to share the truth with the people in regards to this powerful plant medicine. Now, we've only got about 2.5 minutes left, so Karen, maybe you can tell us maybe a little bit more and share your wish for the world as well.
Well, I was just saying, sometimes people say that they get anxiety from having cannabis. And I just want to say that for me, I noticed that was when I needed to go deep with it in a spiritual way. So if I frame it that actually this is me connecting beyond myself and that I'm in a safe space, then that becomes a prayer, that becomes beautiful. If I sit with the anxiety, it becomes worse. So I think people, especially if they're using cannabis for the first time, don't be afraid of that, but recognize that maybe that's when you need to go deeper. And, maybe it might be teaching you something you might not be ready for yet as well.
I can vouch for that.
Yeah.
And then I love that Stephen walks us through what to expect in the beginning as well.
And it's fantastic.
Even as a regular user over the years, that ceremony hit me completely different with very, very little medicine. Stephen always gives me a hard time for saying, wow, so little goes so far.
It does, yeah.
I know.
That's what the practices are. I'm so glad you just said what you said, Karen, because that's exactly what those practices are for, is in that sense, cannabis is an energy medicine. It works with this energy. As I said, it amplifies, it invites you into an ego-releasing, softening way, but that's potentially threatening, and that's the anxiety. The anxiety is coming from the fact that this is a truth serum in that sense. It's pointing out, it could make you feel more vulnerable, and that's difficult for people if they don't recognize what's happening and don't make an attempt to work with it or just buy into the thought about it. And then the last thing I would like to say today in this regard is that Karen, for the listeners and watchers, is actually a priest. And so there's a tradition of the high priestess. So I'd like to think of you as a high priestess.
Yes. Well, without a doubt, the divine feminine.
Yes.
Without a doubt, the priestess, for sure.
Yeah. It's one of the tarot cards too, isn't it? The priestess or the high priestess? Or
it's one of the archetypes, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's not a coincidence that, you know, in your role, I would say anyway, in your role in the church like this, as a priest, that you're a woman, because this is also part of the vision and the archetype and the prophecies, is that the women will start coming forward more and more at this time. You know, because that's the way it was, you know, in ancient Greece, I believe. A lot of times there were these, you know, the oracles, the Delphic oracles, and that whole tradition of the high.
Well, that was me. That was our time.
Oh, bingo.
but you can finish you can finish up, Stephen, for sure.
Well, are we still live?
Because we are still live on Conscious Living Radio. So what we'll do, we'll close up. I just want to say thank you to our guests, because we can talk some more later after. And if anybody wants to catch more, they can catch the whole video on consciouslivingradio.org. My name is Mark Cron. I want to thank our guest, Stephen Gray, or my co-host today, Stephen Gray, and our guest, Karen Urquhart. And you've been listening to Conscious Living Radio on 100.5 CFRO FM in Vancouver, Co-op Radio. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you again next time. Perfect. I like that pause because it makes for an easy edit.
Indeed. Yes, I figured that one out for myself with my little short video.
Yes, no, exactly.
A few seconds, you know,
yeah.
Before you reach that button, you know.
Yeah. But that's, you know, just powerful stuff. And I think, you know, being 420, it's just a great message for everybody out there today. And I think that, you know, the more we can, you know, share this work, and I encourage anybody to sit with Stephen or anybody who does these kind of ceremonies, because they are very, very profound. And like you were saying earlier, for those who have never sat or used cannabis, you know, it's a great, safe setting to do so.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that's great.
Is the Zoom thing still being recorded? Are we still?
We are on. We are still going. We're recording, and we are live still.
Oh, okay.
See, it's just so our viewers know, and anybody watching, Conscious Living Radio is an hour program. So this video, as we do what we do in our new world, we're editing it, we're taking the sound, and we're giving it to the station. They put it up, but we can only do an hour, and then I've got to edit it, add some music and a few things, so it shortens up a little bit. But we can go as long as we want while we're here on Facebook.
No, once we've stopped recording on Zoom, I have one or two quick logistical questions for you, but not.
Absolutely.
Bore the audience with them. Yeah. Well, I should get going soon anyway, Mark.
No problem.
Another event coming up at 5.
Yeah, and I've got one at 7. For anybody watching out there, I've got my 3rd episode of the Better Everyday Life Project coming this evening. This evening, we're going to talk about the power of your identity, one of the most powerful forces in your psychological makeup. Who are you? So you can join us there. I'll put the link down below also. Okay. But Karen, again, thank you so much for joining us. And if you have any other message that you'd like to share with the world and anybody who might be watching, it's a great time to share.
Yeah, I'm just, thank you for having me. It's been really good to be able to talk about this at last. It's been something I've been wanting to do just waiting for the right opportunity. And yeah, there's lots more that I can tell you about, some synchronicities that have happened when I was away in Assisi, and I got this random book that I bought, and it came with a label that had 420 on it. It was a hand-numbered book of 1 of 2,000, and the random book I was given after I'd been praying about how does this all come together, because I don't know whether this is meant to be what I'm doing, and then I get handed this book with the 420 number all over it, you know. So I'm remembering that today because of the 420 thing. That was
good. Yeah.
It's interesting. Out of all the numbers I get, the book was 420. It's a book on St. Francis with Italian and English on either side and beautiful mosaics. And this guy went out the back for ages and brought me this one copy.
Well, synchronicities are amazing. And the one thing I've learned in my life is when I see those synchronicities that are just like bam, 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 and there's never a doubt, like you just know, and anybody watching who's had these, you know what we're talking about. And to me, that always tells me when I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, doing exactly what I'm supposed to be doing, with whom, and that it's just one of those divine moments of the universe lining up saying, you're here.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I just go on.
Oh, I was just going to say, my feeling is that whatever that is, whether it's our higher self, our guardian angels, our spirit guides, whatever they or that is, I feel like they're always trying to get through to us. They're always trying to let us know that there are pathways to follow. That's what I think synchronicities are. And I think it's actually, it's one of the core subjects, at the University of Life that we're just, we're on day, most of us are sort of on day one of that program. We're like baby spiritual warriors, and our course material, as I say, one of the sort of core subjects is learning to recognize, for starters, and then pay attention to and honor these little messages, these little synchronicities, that come along. You and I, Mark, have talked about the golden thread, following the golden thread. It's like the kind of information that comes that when you can get yourself out of the way, so to speak, and you're not trying to force things, that you're just kind of, this is where quieting the mind as much as possible is really helpful, because the quieter your mind, the more you can slow down and allow that space and pay attention to the golden thread or the synchronicities.
Or even notice the golden thread and the synchronicities.
Yeah, that's what I meant. Yeah, notice it. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And also, again, the slowing down with cannabis too, a lot of people have noticed how it stretches time out. It's like it allows you a deeper entry into this moment. The first hour, especially, I find, like I'll go, that was only an hour. And it's like so much happened. I've been so many places in just that 1 hour, or I've been going out for evening walks lately. My local neighborhood has kind of become my temple, just quiet walks where I'm, thoughts come up and I let them go. And then I pay attention to the blossoming cherries again, or look up at the giant oak trees reaching for the sky to say hello to the sun the next day. And I just, like, I'll be walking along a block, and by the time I get to the end of the block, I'll think, wow, that was a really long walk to get to that end of that block. How nice that was that I had that time to, to walk that block. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I know you got to get going, Stephen, and I got to prepare as well. Yeah. Again, thank you, Karen, for joining us. And if you'd like to do some more of this in the future, I'm happy to share more of your message, anything you want to share. We've got a great platform. Now is the time, as we're all kind of sitting at home doing things differently. And this is one of my ways of doing different things, and I'm really quite enjoying it. So I just thank you both for taking the time to share your messages with the world. And we hope to see you guys at our cannabis ceremony this Saturday night online. Yes. Anybody watching, because I know, Karen, you'll be there, Stephen, you'll be there, and I have to be there.
So do I think.
Yeah, we'll be there, and we're gonna have fun doing it. So thanks again, everyone. Happy 420.
Yes,
nearly life inspired. Absolutely.